Good evening, everybody. Mr. Johnny is in the process of dropping a trailer right at this moment, and so he's got to do that, and he's got to do a couple of other things, and then he's going to try to jump in with us. So he's going to be a little bit late, but he is planning on joining us. This was just kind of a crazy week. We should get, as many of you know, he just started a new position. So it should transition and be a little bit smoother, and we should be able to get him on here on a regular basis. But for now, it's going to be me. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and dive right in, if that is okay. I hope you guys had an okay week. I know it was, I had a lot going on. So I'm a little bit tired this week, but I'm here, and I'm so glad that I'm here. I love coming to this community and having these discussions and bringing these ideas. So just want to say welcome back again to Deservingly You. I'm Shannon Avery Briggs, and I do this show with my husband, John Briggs. We are former Jehovah's Witnesses. We're certified transformational resilience coaches and the founders of the Exit Generation. And every week what we do is we come here because we believe something pretty simple, that leaving isn't the finished line, but learning how to build a life afterward is. So before we get into tonight's conversation, though, we definitely want to take a minute to say thank you for these last several weeks. Many of you have been supporting us in the America's Favorite Couple contest. We almost made it to the quarterfinals. We were kind of zigzagging back and forth between first and second. And then in those last few hours, we ended up finishing fourth in the group. And so that means that our run in the contest, has ended. But what we got from the experience, though, was so much bigger than where we finished. From the beginning, we always said that it wasn't about winning a contest. It gave us an opportunity to share the vision of the Exit Generation with people who may never have heard about this community or understood what rebuilding after high control environments can actually involve. And you guys helped us to do that. I was able to have some really good conversations with some people that learned about what we were doing. But you guys, you voted, you shared the post and encouraged us, and you supported what we're trying to build with the Exit Generation. And we absolutely felt that support. And we are so incredibly thankful for it. So whether, you voted or whatever you did, thank you very much. We're very, very grateful for how this community has shown up for us. So now what we get to keep doing is that part that matters the most in the first place, and that's building this. So tonight is actually a pretty important night in that work, because we've actually reached, in this round of talking about the exit paths framework, we're reaching the final, not the final, but in this round of the exit paths phase 2, we've reached the final episode for this year. And that phase is called Allow the Grief. So we're going to be ending it with something that I think that almost anyone who has experienced grief eventually runs into. You might be thinking that you're doing better, and maybe you actually are doing better, but then something ends up hitting. And it might be something obvious, a specific date shows up on the calendar, or you come across a photograph or a conversation, you hear somebody's name, or sometimes you don't even know what caused it. You just realize that you're having a hard day again. And that's often when we start telling ourselves a story about what that hard day actually means. I thought I was past this, or I thought I was doing better. Why am I back here? But that doesn't mean that you're back anywhere. You're having a hard moment, and that's different. And I think that's one of the most important things that we're going to be having a distinction on tonight. Because if every grief wave becomes evidence that we've lost our progress, then we don't just have the grief to deal with anymore. So now we're also dealing with what we've decided that grief says about us. So tonight isn't about teaching you how to stop another grief wave from happening. We can't promise that. That's not the way that life works. It's actually about what you can do when one comes. And how do you recognize what's happening? How do you steady yourself? And how do you find your way back into your life without deciding that one hard moment erased everything on all that progress that you have made? Because another wave can come, but the difference is that you don't have to meet it with that same way that you used to. So tonight we're going to give you a simple 3-step reset for those moments. Recognize, regulate, and re-enter. Now, this isn't to make grief disappear by any means, but to help you come back to yourself when it shows up. So for all of you in the audience, welcome to how to come back to yourself after a grief wave. So as always, we always want to create the kind of room that we wish more of us had, years ago. And if this is your first time here, welcome. We're really glad that you found us. And one of the things that we do is we don't have a room of debate. This isn't a place where you have to defend yourself or a room where you have to prove how much something hurt in order for it to matter. This is a place for you to become curious, curious about what's happening inside you, about what you're feeling, curious about what you might need. And tonight, especially, curious about what happens when grief catches you by surprise. So you don't have to fix anything tonight as usual. In fact, just be curious, like we said. Sometimes if we just notice a feeling and immediately go into, okay, how do I get rid of this? Well, tonight, we just rather have you notice it, and that will be enough. And as always, listening counts. Some nights, if you in the chat or if you decide to come on the stage later, sometimes you have words, sometimes you won't. But both of those are participating. And because we are, once again, talking about grief tonight, please pay attention to your body. You might notice tension. You might notice you're holding your breath. You might feel tired. You might notice absolutely nothing. That there's no right response at all with this. But if something does feel, you may need to get up and stretch, or you might need to grab some water, even to just step aside for a minute. This is your space, and you get to decide what taking care of you really looks like here. So here we are, phase 2, allow the grief. And this is for this trip around the world with phase 2. This is our final episode for this at this time. So, it feels a little strange to say too, because we obviously are not announcing that everybody's grief should be complete and that it's fixed and we're done. Know that there's not going to be any certifications or certificates at the end, and no graduation from grief, because that's not what allow the grief has ever meant. Over these last several weeks, we've talked about anger, we've talked about sadness, we've talked about why healing can sometimes feel like betrayal. We've talked about grieving those people who are still alive and telling our stories. And last week we talked about remembering on purpose. And all of those conversations have been different, but there's something underneath all of them. And we've been learning about what happens when we stop fighting ourselves for having a human response to loss. And that's why I really, really like to where we're ending this on this round with phase 2, because we're not ending with, okay, now we're done with grief. We're ending with what happens if or when it comes back. Because allowing grief means learning how to experience it without getting stuck in it. And that's what this whole phase has been building toward. And there's something from phase 2 that probably will come back. you may revisit anger or sadness, or something you thought you understood may hit you differently 6 months from now. There may be a relationship that changed, or there may be another memory that surfaces that you hadn't thought of in a certain way. That doesn't mean that phase 2 didn't work, and it doesn't mean that you didn't do it right. Exit paths is never a straight line. We're going to keep moving forward, and sometimes we're going to circle back to something that we've already touched, but we don't necessarily meet it the same way as the same person. That's the difference. So hopefully these last few weeks, you've learned a few things, and you've noticed some things, and you've been practicing some things, and you yourself know even more about yourself. So maybe the real question at the end of phase 2 isn't, am I finished grieving? Maybe it's, when grief comes again, do I know myself a little bit better inside of it? And so that's where we're going tonight. And Johnny just popped in, so I'm going to add him to the stage. John, are you there?
I am.
Okay.
I just got settled. I'm trying to get settled here. Oh, it's been a crazy day.
All right. Well, we're just jumping into what we're working towards tonight, our goals for tonight. And so I'll go ahead and take this, and then we'll have you jump in on the next slide, okay? So that you can make sure that you're all good and settled. Does that sound okay? All right.
Yes.
So here's what we're hoping that you walk away from tonight. First, we want you to be able to recognize a grief wave without immediately deciding that you've gone backwards, because a hard moment doesn't erase the progress that you've made. And then we're going to give you a really simple reset, like I mentioned earlier, those 3 steps: the recognize, regulate, and re-enter. And it's simple. It's intentionally simple. When you're overwhelmed, that's probably not the time that you're going to remember 12 steps in a worksheet, right? So I know for me, even before the show, I couldn't even remember why I was walking into the office versus the kitchen and stuff. So some days, there's no, and so 3 is definitely good. So we're also going to be talking about what coming back to yourself actually means, because I don't want everybody hearing that phrase and thinking, okay, the goal here is to make myself feel better as fast as possible. That is absolutely not what this means. You can come back to yourself and still be sad. And you can know what you need and still be hurting. And you can take that next step without, without feeling completely okay first. So then towards the end of tonight, I need to get a drink here. So towards the end of tonight, we're going to look back also, because we've spent a lot of time in phase 2 talking about what hurts. Tonight, I want us to also notice what we've built. What do you understand now that you didn't understand before? And what can you recognize now? What can you do now? What choices do you have now that maybe you didn't realize that you had when this all started? I know there's been some conversations that I've even had with Linda, where she was like, and she shared even on the channel here, I had never thought of it that way, So that's what we're wanting to do, is bring these ideas forward so that you can have something like that. There's another way to measure progress, not does this ever hurt anymore, but what do I know how to do when it does? So that's the shift. The goal isn't to avoid the wave, it's to know what to do when it comes. And so that's where we're going to start. So let's start with the moment itself. You're going along, and maybe you're having a pretty normal day, and then something happens. A song comes on, or you see that photograph, or a date pops up on the calendar, or even having a dream. I know recently I ended up having a conversation I wasn't expecting to have, and then suddenly you're not okay.
Yeah, and then sometimes you know exactly what's going on here. You can almost point to it and say, "Yep, that did it." And you can't, you just notice you're off, and you're more emotional. Maybe you're irritated. Maybe you're tired. Maybe you just can't focus on anything in that moment, or maybe you just want to be alone, and you really have no idea why. You can't pinpoint why. I really dial in on that.
Yeah. And I think that's important because sometimes we start investigating ourselves. What happened? What triggered this? Why am I feeling this way? What did I miss? And then pretty soon we end up turning that hard day into a detective case instead.
And then when maybe it's just a hard day, and maybe something got stirred up, maybe your body, um, noticed something before your mind really could um, identify what was happening, or maybe you won't figure out what caused it, and you don't really necessarily need to either.
Yeah. So understanding can be helpful, but understanding the cause is not a requirement for taking care of yourself. I want to say that again. Understanding the cause is not a requirement for taking care of yourself. So that's something that we're going to be coming back to tonight, because sometimes the most useful question isn't why is this happening? It's what do I need now that it is happening? What do I need?
Right. And then there's the other things that happen. We start comparing this moment to how we've been doing, in the recent past. And I've been doing so well. I haven't cried about this in months. These are the thoughts that are going on in your mind, or I thought I was past this. Why can't I just get over it?
And there it is. I thought I was doing better. But having another grief wave doesn't mean that you weren't doing better. You can be doing better and still have a hard day. Both can be true in the same moment.
Yeah, and that's probably the first thing that we want you to take from the first thing that we want you to take from tonight. Don't use one moment to grade the entire journey.
Yeah, because one wave doesn't tell you how far that you've come. All it does is tell you a wave came, and that's all we know so far. When that wave hits.
So I really like this slide because I think this is how a lot of us expect progress to work. Okay, something hurts, we want to start working through it. We feel a little better, then a little better, then a little more better, and eventually done.
Yeah, wouldn't that be so convenient?
Right, very much so, huh? But that's usually not what happens. Okay, real life looks more like the second line there. You can see better. Okay, one day, a hard day, okay, better, just like a roller coaster there. An unexpected wave, then you're steady again, and then maybe another hard day somewhere down the road. You just never know what's coming from day to day at some point, sometimes.
Yeah, and here's where I think that we can accidentally make grief harder. We compare what's actually happening to what we thought should be happening. So if I believe that healing is supposed to be a straight line, every difficult day looks like a failure.
Exactly. Instead of just simply being part of the process.
Yeah, right. And so that's why I want to introduce a different question. Instead of asking why am I still having these, we might ask ourselves, what do I know how to do now that I didn't know how to do before. It's a completely different way of measuring progress and even looking at it.
And maybe the great grief still hits, but now you recognize it sooner, right? And that's progress. Maybe you know it when you need some space instead of pushing yourself until you snap, okay, at somebody. And that's real progress there, especially when you can recognize it in real time as it's unfolding. And maybe you know who you can call, or maybe you know when getting off social media is probably a good idea, or maybe you know that you need to eat something before you try to solve your entire life. Just
Huh. That one actually sounds like it might be a great t-shirt. Know when you need to eat something before you try to solve your whole entire life.
totally, right? Work on that blood sugar. Seriously.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And so sometimes it looks really ordinary, and it's not always some giant breakthrough. Sometimes it's just noticing. I used to lose 3 days to this, whereas today I noticed what was happening and I took care of myself. Or I still had the hard day, but it didn't turn into the hard day into a judgment about my entire life. Because we have a tendency to do that, right? When something goes wrong, it's like all of a sudden everything gets a lot bigger instead of just focusing on what the situation truly is.
Exactly. That's why the line at the bottom really matters there. Progress isn't measured by never getting knocked off balance. Sometimes it's measured by how you find your footing after you get thrown off balance.
Yeah, and I think that's a much fairer measurement too. Not did life ever knock me over again, but what happens inside me when it does. So now we're going to separate something that often happens so quickly that we don't even realize that we're doing it. There can actually be 2 layers to a grief wave. And layer 1 is very simple. Something hurts, and that's the wave.
And then comes layer 2, the story that we add to what we're feeling, right? I haven't healed. I'm back at square one. Nothing's changed here. I should be further along. Okay. I thought I was past this. Yep.
Yeah. So here's the thing that I want you to notice. Those aren't feelings. They're conclusions. And that's a really important difference, because sadness might be what you're feeling, but I'm back to square one is something that you've decided that sadness means.
Then that second layer can make the first one a whole lot heavier. Okay. Now, things like now I'm not just sad, I'm sad and disappointed in myself for being sad. I'm hurting, and now I'm worried that all the work I've done just doesn't matter now.
Yeah. Or we might start comparing ourselves. Other people seem to be moving on. Why can't I? I should be doing so much better than now. And suddenly one grief wave has come and has become that evidence in that case that we're building against ourselves.
And the only thing who actually know is, or what we actually know is, something hurts today.
Yeah, exactly. And here's one of the things I want to be careful about here. We're not saying that the story underneath the grief doesn't matter. Sometimes there is something there worth looking at, but we don't have to automatically believe that every single conclusion that we make while we're hurting we don't have to believe it, every single one.
Yeah, and that's huge, because emotions, they give us information, okay, but they don't always give us an accurate progress report.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. That's why I always say, don't make any big decisions, when you're emotionally charged or on impulse.
Yeah. That's why I love the distinction on this slide. Feeling something again is not the same as becoming who you were again. You know, you can feel something that you felt before without being taken back to where you were before.
Right. It's the same feeling, different person, different tools, different awareness, different choices.
Yeah. So if we take a look at this again, you know, the wave is the experience. The meaning that we add can make it heavier. And learning to separate those two gives us a little bit more room. You know, not necessarily enough room to make the grief disappear, but enough room to actually ask the question, what's happening here? Remember way back when John and I, when we would talk about the power of the pause, the power of the pause, this is in alignment with that.
Absolutely. And this here, it brings us to something that we should probably define before we give you the reset. Now, what do we mean when we say come back to yourself? Because it would be really easy to hear that, you know, as okay, I do these 3 steps, then I feel better.
Yeah. So like we said before, that's not what we're promising. You know, coming back to yourself does not necessarily mean feeling good. And it doesn't mean that sadness disappears or you're suddenly productive again, or it doesn't mean that you've figured everything out. And it definitely doesn't mean that you have to get yourself back to exactly how you felt before that wave happened.
Yeah, sometimes you won't. You know, maybe today is simply going to be a sad day. Okay. And a sad day doesn't automatically mean that something has went horribly wrong somewhere or somehow.
Yeah. And I think that this is where we can be much kinder to ourselves. Because if our definition of regulation is I no longer feel the emotion, then every emotion becomes a problem that we're trying to solve. So instead of, you know, something we're, you know, learning how to experience. Because sometimes coming back to yourself sounds more like I'm still sad, but I'm here. I know what's happening. I'm not fighting myself over it. I'm not making 10 decisions based on how I feel in this exact moment. I'm here. Oh, and Johnny muted himself.
Yeah. Okay, so.
Or it hurts, you know, this hurts and I know what I need next.
Okay, I lost my place. I'm sorry. So, this brings us to something we should probably define before we actually.
No, maybe, yeah. So sometimes this hurts and I don't, you know, it's like you don't know what you need next. You know, you might need quiet.
Yeah.
You might need somebody safe. You might need food. You might need to just stop for today or get up and do one small thing. You know, that's coming back. You know, not because that feeling has disappeared, but because you came back into the relationship with yourself. You know, you can actually hear yourself again and you can make choices again and you can ask yourself what you need instead of only reacting to what hurts. And sometimes what you need is more support. And you can give yourself that in a moment as well. And that's one of the things that we want to say clearly too. You know, that this 3-step reset is a tool for working through a grief wave. Here's the thing that it is not. Please, please, please listen. This is not meant to replace professional or crisis support when that's what you need. I want to say that again. This reset tool is not meant to replace professional or crisis support if that's what you need. And if a grief wave becomes something more, if you're concerned about your safety or you're afraid that you might hurt yourself, please, please, please reach out for immediate support. There's no expectation here that you should be able to regulate your way through every single situation yourself. And knowing when you need somebody beside you is part of taking care of yourself too. Looks like I kind of lost Johnny. I'm not sure what happened there, but so I'm just going to keep going. We'll wait for him to come back. I think one of the things too that's important to say is because coming back to yourself can actually include reaching for somebody else. And it doesn't always mean that you're doing it alone. So with that understood, the reset that we're about to show you isn't designed to take you from grief to happy. It's designed to help you move from I'm caught in this to I'm here, I know what's happening, what do I need next? And so that's where step one actually begins. I'm sorry, Johnny, what?
Shannon, did you get stuck on that slide? There we go.
We're on recognize.
Yeah.
So step one is recognize. And really we're starting with that one question. What's happening right now?
So notice that we're not starting with how do I stop this? How do I fix this? Or how do I get myself out of it? We're just trying to recognize where we are here.
Yeah, because when something hits us, we can react before we've even identified what we're reacting to. Maybe I'm sad, angry, lonely. Maybe I'm overwhelmed or I'm feeling rejected, or we may not even know yet.
And I think that last one matters. You don't have to immediately have the answer. Recognize doesn't mean you have to perfectly explain everything that's happening. It means you pause, long enough just to notice, to notice it.
Yeah. So we can start with some really basic questions here. What am I feeling? What happened before this? What's happening in my body? Are my shoulders tight? Does my stomach feel off? Am I exhausted? Do I feel restless? Am I noticing that I'm holding my breath?
Then there's another really important question there. What am I telling myself that this means? Because that's where that second layer we just talked about can show up. Something hurts, and almost immediately we decide what the hurt means.
Yeah. So for example, like when I think back of receiving a letter of no contact from one of my family members, some of those stories that end up playing in my brain might say I'm unlovable. They're rejecting me because I'm unlovable. So some of these situations, we might have messages playing like that in our brain. Oh, I'm back at the beginning. I haven't made any progress. Nobody really cares about me. I'm always going to feel this way. And when we can recognize that thought, doesn't mean that you have to argue with it right now. Just notice it. This is what I'm telling myself.
And then you can get curious. Is there something underneath what I'm feeling? Sometimes anger has sadness underneath it. Sometimes irritation is exhaustion, or sometimes what looks like anger is actually hurt. And loneliness shows up as wanting to push everyone away.
Yeah. And then there's other times we just don't know, and that's why I really want to emphasize the line on this slide that sometimes we don't know what triggered the wave. We don't have to solve that mystery before we start caring for ourselves.
And you don't need a complete explanation either before you're allowed to respond to what you're actually experiencing.
Yeah. So I'm really curious in the chat if anybody wants to put a chat if this is resonating, if you guys have ever noticed yourself doing those types of things. When we experience these types of things too, we're not conducting an investigation. We're actually wanting to create enough awareness so that we can make a choice, so that we're not reacting. So step one is simply name where you are before deciding where you need to go. And once we have some idea of where we are, that's when we can actually move to step 2. Thank you, Linda.
So step 2, regulate. And the question changes from what's happening to what do I need to do right now?
And this is where I really don't want us turning regulation into some kind of complicated new project. You know, you don't need 17 new tools, or you don't need to order anything or another app. You don't need to become an expert in your nervous system before Tuesday.
Yeah. And we're probably talking about things that you probably already know how to do, like drink some water, eat something, step outside, move your body, turn the noise down, put the phone away for a while, cry if you need to. These are just things that might just escape our thoughts, at any given time, but we can definitely, think about them and have reminders to do these things.
Absolutely. And here's the important part too. We're not asking which one of these is the correct regulation tool. We're asking what might help me feel a little safer or a little steadier right now in this moment. And that's a very different question.
Right. Because if the question is, how do I make myself stop feeling this? And the emotion itself, it becomes the enemy.
Yeah. So, and that's not what we want to do here. Regulation isn't telling yourself stop being sad, stop being angry, calm down, get over it, all of that. Regulation is helping yourself to have enough room around that emotion so that you can choose what happens next.
Sometimes that seems really basic. You may realize I've been scrolling for 2 hours and I'm getting more upset. Okay, maybe the phone just needs to be put away.
Yeah, or you may have noticed, I haven't eaten anything since breakfast. That's one of my things, is like I'll forget to eat and stuff. So, or maybe before I analyze my whole entire emotional state, I'll actually eat something.
Or maybe you need to get in touch with another person. Now, not necessarily somebody who can fix anything, just somebody who feels safe to you.
Yeah. Self-regulation doesn't always mean to do it by yourself. Sometimes the thing that helps us steady is connection. Making that phone call, sitting beside somebody, or letting somebody know that that you're having a hard day.
Right. So instead of asking yourself, how do I make myself stop feeling this? Maybe try, what would help me feel a little safer, or steadier right now?
Because the skill here isn't to have the perfect tool. It's learning to ask yourself, what do I need? And then, as much as you can, respond to that answer. So then we go into step 3, that re-enter. And the question here is, what's my next small step back into my life? And I remember feeling that when I was talking about that letter and stuff, how it felt like such a black hole in getting that letter. And so what were some of the things that I had to do, those small steps that I had to do to start getting back?
Yeah, small is the important word here, because we're not asking, how do I get my whole day back? It's just how do I catch up on everything? But how do I become productive again?
Yeah. And here's the other thing too, is like, we can't be making a comeback plan for the entire week while you're sitting in the middle of a grief wave. All we're doing is looking for one step. And it might be taking a shower, or making dinner, going outside, looking at the stars, watching a sunset, return one phone call, something like that.
Sometimes the next step is just shut it down, go to bed.
Yeah. And re-entering your life doesn't always mean doing more too. Sometimes what this is recognizing that I've done enough for today, and so now I need to rest, and I can begin again tomorrow. I can give it another try then.
And that's still a choice. That's still you coming back into the driver's seat, so to speak.
Yeah. And I think that this is where the word re-enter really matters as well. We're not pretending that the grief didn't happen. And we're not saying, okay, it's over, all back to normal. We're going to go back to, we're allowing life to exist beside that grief. So I can be sad and I can make dinner. I can miss somebody and I can walk my dog. I can have a hard morning and still have, answer one email this afternoon.
Absolutely. See, both things can exist at the same time.
Yeah. And I think too, that can be one of the biggest shifts in grief. We stop waiting for ourselves to feel completely okay before we're allowed to participate in our lives again.
Right.
John
You don't have to.
John John Mars said that taking control after grief. Yeah.
Absolutely. You don't have to get all the way back either. You just need the next step.
Yeah. And sometimes it's teeny tiny, but tiny still counts because that goal isn't we're just going to get over it. It's learning how to come back to yourself. That's the goal, is coming back. So
now we need to put a pretty important guardrail around everything that we just talked about, because otherwise somebody is going to try these 3 steps, still feel terrible 20 minutes later, and decide that they did it all wrong.
Yep. Yeah. So please don't turn this 3-step reset into some other test that you can fail.
Sometimes it may help in 10 minutes. Okay, you recognize what's happening. You do something that helps you kind of steady yourself, and you feel ready to take a small step back into your day. That's wonderful.
Yeah. Other times it's going to take the afternoon, and you may need more space, more quiet, more rest, and you may recognize that I'm not going to re-enter anything yet. I still need some time.
And sometimes the answer there is just go to bed and we'll try again tomorrow.
Yeah. Rest sometimes is that next step. And I think that's especially important for people who have spent a lot of their times believing that they have to push through everything. Sometimes you don't. And I think too, there's a lot of times I've heard of people, even talking about feeling back when they were in part of the system and everything, about feeling guilty about sleeping in on a Saturday. So some of this may trigger, if you're relatively new out, it may trigger that nervous system to trigger a guilt feeling. But recognizing when you actually need rest is really important.
Right. The reset isn't meant to make grief go away completely. That's not how we're measuring whether it worked.
Yeah. What we want to do is start looking for something smaller. Am I a little more aware of what's happening? Or do I feel slightly steadier? Can I identify what I need? Or what's that one choice instead of simply reacting? Those small steps, that can be enough.
And if the answer is no, okay, that doesn't mean that you failed either. Maybe you need more time, or maybe you need more support. And maybe today is just hard.
Yeah. So this is a tool, this 3-step piece. It's a tool. It is not a deadline. And I really want us to remember that, this, it's, 10 minutes, it's an afternoon, tomorrow, we're not racing through this, because grief can be complicated for sure.
Yeah, we're learning how to stay connected to ourselves while we move through it.
Yeah, exactly. So once we understand that, we can do something that's really useful, and we can start thinking about our own patterns. So then before that next wave comes, because if you know some of the things that tend to help you, you don't have to invent the plan while you're already overwhelmed. And that's where we're going to be taking a look at next. What does that return plan look like for you?
So now let's take a look at these 3 steps. Recognize, regulate, re-enter, and make them yours, because that what helps Shannon may not help me, and what helps me may not do her any good either.
Yep, that's definitely true. And what helps you in one grief wave might not even be what helps you in another. So we're not trying to create some perfect formula here. What we're trying to do is learn about ourselves so that then the next time a wave comes, we actually have somewhere to start.
Think of this as your personal return plan, so to speak. Not something that you have to fill out tonight or right away. Just 5 things worth knowing about yourself. First, how do I know a wave may be coming or starting?
Yeah. And this is where looking at your own patterns can really help. Maybe when something like this happens, if a wave hits you, you might get really quiet, or you might be irritated, or you start scrolling, or you start searching all over the internet for answers. Your thoughts may start racing. Can't concentrate. Maybe you're somebody who is in tune with their body, and it starts telling you things before anything else does. Or maybe that it's that stomach that tightens up, or your shoulders, you find yourself tightening your shoulders, or you just can't feel settled. It's like, that's why, we talk a lot. John and I have talked a lot about being really curious and listening and noticing some of those little things, because they can help you in these type of situations if a wave comes.
And those things aren't there for you to judge. They're just information. They're early signs that maybe something just needs your attention.
Yeah. And so then it comes to what tends to steady me. And we just talked about this. Maybe it might be going outside, listening. Music is a huge one for me. Or being quiet, or maybe it's dancing in the middle of your living room, or having a little bit of food, or taking a shower, taking a bubble bath, or getting your journal out. And here's the thing too that I want to say. When we say food, we're not talking about like grabbing fast food or whatever might be the quickest just because we haven't eaten. If we're trying to help our body through a hard moment, we can choose those foods that actually give it something useful. Foods like magnesium, like pumpkin seeds, almonds, spinach, beans, or even some dark chocolate. Or foods with B vitamins like eggs, leafy greens, beans, whole grains, or avocado. Foods with omega-3s like salmon, sardines, walnuts, or chia seeds. Now, these nutrients support things like energy production, our brain function, and our normal nervous system function, and all of those things that our body is relying on, especially when we're under stress.
All right, so we're not saying eat the right thing and suddenly you're not sad anymore either.
No, definitely not at all. Food isn't going to take the grief away. We're talking about supporting our body, the body that's carrying that grief, because if we think about what can happen on a hard day, maybe you haven't eaten, and maybe you haven't had enough water, or you didn't sleep well. Now you're asking a body that's already running low to manage something that is emotionally difficult as well.
So part of asking the question, what do I need right now? Might be checking some of those really just basic things that we all seem to overlook at times.
Yeah. So we're going to actually spend some more time on next week when we begin phase 3. But for now, the point is simply this: taking care of your body can be part of helping yourself feel steadier. Whatever you've learned actually can help you.
Then there's a big one here. Who can I safely reach for? Okay, and notice the word safely.
Yeah. Because we're not talking about reaching for somebody simply because they're available. We're talking about people who help you feel steadier, not people who make the moment bigger, not somebody that, someone that you don't have to explain everything to, and someone who doesn't immediately tell you what you should do. I want to say that again, because we see a lot of that in the community, where we'll we'll put a pain out there, and all of a sudden you've got all of these recommendations of what you should be doing. You want somebody who is going to simply be with you.
Then we flip it around with the question, what tends to make a wave worse? And that's worth knowing also.
Yeah. It could be doing that isolation, or we do that doom scrolling, right? Or staying online and reading just one more comment, and then one more comment, and then one more comment, and then one more comment.
Yeah, right. When you already know you're not feeling well.
Yeah, exactly. So maybe it's trying to solve that entire past while you're activated. Now that one definitely can get us. Something hurts today, and suddenly we're mentally reviewing 30 years.
And you don't have to solve your whole history because Tuesday afternoon was difficult.
Right. And then there's that last part, what are my smallest re-entry steps? Not the things you think that you should be able to do, but the things that you can realistically do when you're having that hard day.
Right. Yeah, like what's been mentioned before. Maybe it's a shower, get something to eat, a walk, give someone a call. Just do one thing that needs to get done. Or decide I'm done for today and just I'll start again tomorrow.
Yeah. And I think this is why having this kind of plan matters, because when you're in the middle of a wave, that's probably not the best time to invent everything from scratch. You've already been doing some of the thinking, some of the signs, some of the things that help, who's safe, what tends to make it worse, and you may have a few small ways to get back into your life.
Right, and you're basically just kind of leaving directions for yourself.
Yeah, I love that. Leaving directions for yourself. And I know for me, like when I did end up getting that letter, it's because I had something like this for me that I wasn't so traumatized for a long time. I was able to get through it. So leaving those directions for yourself, it's not because you're assuming that you're going to get lost, but because you've learned enough about yourself to know the way back. And that's what this whole reset is really about. So I want us to stop here for a minute too, because we're about to close out phase 2 for this round. And I don't want us to move past everything that we've done without actually noticing it. I want you to look at these words, notice, naming, feeling, sorting, setting boundaries, making meaning, choosing, telling, coming back.
Yeah, and those are skills. I think that's pretty important because when you're living through grief, it can be really hard to see your own progress and to recognize what's happening, especially if you're measuring progress by whether something still hurts or not.
Yeah. The past may not have changed, and the people involved may not have changed. Some of the circumstances may never change. But the relationship with yourself inside all of it can change. And that's the part that we've been working on.
And maybe now you notice something a little bit sooner. Or maybe you have words for something that you just couldn't name before, right? Maybe you can understand why a particular loss affected you the way it did. And maybe you've learned that you can set a boundary without needing everyone else to agree, with where you're coming from.
And that's a really challenging one for many people coming out of the system to to grasp, is that last statement that you said, learning that you can set a boundary without needing everybody else to agree with it. And it can be really, really difficult to set that boundary, and there's even times where with setting the boundary, we have that urge to explain why that boundary is so important, and thinking that the person on the other side of the boundary needs to understand where they're coming from. It's not, it's the boundary. So maybe you've also learned that anger doesn't make you a bad person, or that sadness doesn't make you weak. Missing somebody doesn't mean that you made a wrong decision. And one that we've really been focusing on the last few weeks is telling your story doesn't mean that everybody is entitled to every part of it.
Right. So maybe you're learning that you get choices. And that's a pretty big thing after leaving high control.
Yeah, it definitely is. Because so much of phase 2 has been about separating what happened from what we want to do with it now. What belongs to me? What doesn't? What do I want to carry? What pieces can I put down? Where is there a need for a boundary? And what needs a voice? And what simply needs to be grieved?
And so tonight we've added another skill. Okay, when a wave comes, you can see it, you can recognize it, and you can ask what you need, and you can begin finding your way back.
Yeah. So that brings us to the 2 lines at the bottom of the slide. And I really want I want to bring attention to these. Maybe the evidence that you're ready to leave phase 2 isn't that grief stopped coming. Maybe it's that when grief comes, you don't have to abandon yourself anymore.
And that's very different. The grief may still be there, but you're there. Okay, you're in control.
Yeah. And so I think that this is a beautiful place to end the phase, that we've called Allow the Grief. Not with I don't hurt anymore, but I can hurt without leaving myself behind. And that sets us up for a very different question about where we go from here. Yeah, John says, build on what you've learned. Absolutely. Bravo.
And here we are. This brings us to the end of phase 2, like Shannon said. But I want to be really cautious about the word end, because we're not closing the door and saying, okay, we handled grief, now we can move on. That's not what we're doing here.
Yeah, definitely not. We're definitely not doing that. In fact, that's why we put this reminder right here on this on the slide. That exit paths isn't linear, and you may revisit something from phase 2 months from now, or even years from now, or something could happen in your life that brings a loss back completely in a different way. That does not mean that you failed.
So it doesn't mean you're starting over. It means something just needs your attention again. And now you may have more ways to respond to it.
Yep. So we've been asking a version of this question. What am I carrying, and what do I want to do with it? All throughout the phase. I don't know whether you guys noticed that woven in there. We've looked at anger and sadness and loss and relationships, memories, our stories, and we've looked at what do we want to keep, what might we be ready to put down, and what are we still learning how to carry differently.
But now another question becomes possible, and that's, what do I want to build from here going forward? And notice that we don't have to wait until everything behind us is completely resolved before we're allowed to ask that question.
Yeah. And I'm curious in the chat if that's something that you guys have kind of thought about coming out of the system. Is that what you thought, is that you had to have everything kind of in the checks and balance before you could move forward? It's because it's really important. And I think that sometimes we end up putting our lives on hold, waiting for that version of ourselves who is, that's going to be completely healed. So once I'm completely over this, then I'm going to start. Or it doesn't hurt anymore. And then when it doesn't hurt anymore, then I'm going to figure out what I want. Or once I feel completely confident, then that's when I'm going to take the next step.
Right, but life is happening while we're trying to figure all that out, isn't it?
Yeah. So you don't have to wait until your grief is finished to actually begin living. And you can still have things that you're working through and build something, and you can still miss people and build something. And you can still have questions that don't have answers and still be building something.
So, yep, and that's where phase 3 begins. Tend the roots.
Yep. So that's where we're going to start paying closer attention to ourselves, about what's supporting me, what's draining me, what's working, what needs some attention. Not because we're looking for another list of things that is wrong with us, but we're going to start looking forward instead of looking, the last 2 phases, we've spent a lot of time looking backwards. And so now we want to take an opportunity to look forward.
Yep, we're looking at the foundation, the everyday parts of our lives that affect how we function, how we feel, and how well we're able to handle what life brings.
Yeah. And so we're going to start that next week with some of the most basic things, sleep, movement, food, quiet, things that can really be easy to overlook, like what we talked about tonight, especially when it gets complicated.
So we're not leaving phase 2 behind. We're taking what we've learned here with us.
Yep, exactly. We can tend the roots while grief still visits, and we can build while we're still learning, and we keep moving forward without pretending everything behind us has been resolved. So that's where we're building from here. Okay, so we would like to open things up here. And if something tonight gave you an aha, or if something really landed, let me grab the link. So if anybody would like to come up on stage, you're more than welcome to.
Right, it doesn't have to be some big question, or maybe just something that clicked for you tonight, some aha moment, or something you want to share. Okay, maybe you're wondering how one of these ideas might apply in your life, and what that might look like. And maybe there's something that you'd like us to explain a little bit more.
Yep. And so we'll keep that link up. Anybody that wants to come up there, they're more than welcome. But we'll keep going. And so if you want to keep the conversation going, we'd love to have you join us in this week's community discussion in the Exit Generation Facebook.
Right, and we'll take some of what we talked about tonight and explore it together with 5 questions. Nothing real huge, just a chance to connect and hear from each other and just continue the conversation.
Yep, we post the details in the group, so any of you who are on there, we'd love to have you. And I am now I see Linda, so I'm going to add her, so we'll pause with that. And Linda, thank you.
Hello.
Hello.
It's really good to be here. I can't find my headphones, so y'all got to hear the fans.
Well, no worries.
I got going on in my bedroom here. So yeah, I'm appreciating that. This is not something you're telling us or suggesting that we end the pain, but rather, as you're going through it, what else can you be doing?
Yep.
Rather than maybe stopping everything, which maybe you need a nap, right?
Yeah.
or I need a nap. And but still keeping it in mind, allowing yourself to be in the feelings, but at the same time moving forward in what the day needs to happen. And sometimes you just take the day off if you need to. I'm really appreciating that, because it's not saying don't feel what you're feeling, don't experience what you're experiencing. It's promoting that we do, is what I'm gathering.
Yeah,
Yes, exactly. Thank you, Linda, for that.
absolutely.
Yeah.
What makes it what do you typically do, if you don't mind me asking, if something happens?
Well, I do the investigation because I'm CSI or Columbo or somebody. I'm all that. But I don't do it a whole lot. I do like to reflect and kind of ask myself what's going on and why. But then I do go into the yeah, this isn't this is normal, because grieving, you don't go through all the steps just once and it's all over. They'll kind of come up at times, different levels or portions of the grieving process. And I just kind of let myself be in it. Sometimes when I let myself be in it and give myself permission to do that. And of course, if I'm at work or some places that I can't, I tell myself I'm going to go home. When I get home, this is what I'm, going to allow myself to do. So
Yeah.
sometimes it'll be 20 minutes, sometimes it'll be 3 days, but I'm also just aware, and I'm also telling myself this is normal to be in this again.
Yeah.
Oh,
So you don't have a tendency to judge yourself?
Oh yeah, that's true. I do judge myself.
Okay.
Um, yeah, I do judge myself. I don't know if I used to think I should be over it, but
Yeah.
I don't any longer. I'm at peace with, oh, it's flushing up again. I
Yeah,
wonder why.
exactly.
So I get kind of like that. And
Yeah.
also too is that um, I've also come to a place where it's okay to grieve over making decisions that were wise, like leaving a toxic relationship or a toxic group. And it's normal for me to miss them. It's
Yeah.
normal for me to grieve over that. Even though I made a very wise decision, I would still grieve. But it doesn't mean I want to be back in that situation any longer either.
Right. That's absolutely right on. Um, when you were talking, one of the things that came to my mind was actually the so PTSD is a sign, a form of this, and when we were in the system, and we were assigned to a certain group, and going in there, I would have PTSD reactions, mild. They weren't major, but they were mild, and and that eventually, like, helped be that sign for me that this isn't a good space for me, so that
Yes.
I could end up changing and moving along. So learning how to be curious and listening to our bodies, there's a reason, that our bodies will react to some of those things. And it wasn't my brain that was telling me that I was in the situation that wasn't good for me. It was the shortness of breath. It was the
Mm-hmm.
tightening of the stomach. So it wasn't the brain was just like, I just don't like this. But it was the physical reactions that my body, those PTSD reactions, that were actually helping me understand when I paused enough to step away.
Yes. And so far, throughout all of this that you have shared with us, you've been saying for us to pay attention to what
Hmm.
our body is telling us, pay attention to what you're feeling. And
Yeah.
that is just not something that was suggested before. It was
Oh, wow.
actually suggested that we squash those down and
Oh,
ignore
yes.
them, you know?
Yeah.
So
In
the
the
fact that we're paying attention is really growth, I think.
Yeah. Yep, definitely. Well, do you have any other thoughts?
No, I just think this was really helpful. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. And I will see you tomorrow night.
Okay. And
Right?
it's good to see you, John.
He I don't know if he got in, if the his Wi-Fi dropped him. He should be back. Maybe he
Oh,
won't. Maybe I'll carry the end of it.
but
I'm not sure. It's
whatever
always
works.
an
Yeah.
adventure. All right. Well, thank you, Linda. We'll continue. All right. So Linda and I were just, what we were just talking about was the opportunity to come to the Exit Generation Facebook, and we're going to take some of what we talked about tonight and go a little bit deeper together with the 5 questions that we've got here. Hopefully it's not too heavy. We just want that chance to connect and to hear from each other and actually have that opportunity to get curious. And so they will be posted in the group, so watch for that. And we would love to have you come and join us. We do this every week after the Deservingly You episode. We have 5 questions then that we cover the next Monday evening. So that it can help us to start having those conversations and be curious about ourselves. So, like we said, next week we're going to begin that phase 3 of exit paths, tending the roots. And we've spent these last several weeks, looking back and making room for grief and learning more about ourselves inside of that. And now we're going to start looking for some of those things that can help us support as we build forward. And like we said before, the basics, we're going to look at sleep and movement and food and things that we can easily overlook, especially when life gets complicated. And then we're going to look at why those things matter, and which ones can help steady us the most and what tends to knock them out of place. Because when we know something is good for us and actually protecting space for it in our lives, those end up being 2 different things. And so we're not going to be coming from this from here's another list of things that you should be doing. We want to be curious about you. We want you to get curious about you. What's working, what isn't, what seems to make the difference, and what might need a little more attention. So that's where we're starting, paying a little bit closer attention to what can support us in our everyday life. And so it's going to be the basics that actually steady us after leaving high control environments. So hope to see you guys here next week as well. And before we wrap up tonight, we want to leave you with this. I think that this really captures what we've been working on throughout phase 2. You don't move forward because grief is finished. You move forward because when grief finds you again, you know how to find yourself too. So grief may come back, a memory may come back, a hard day may come back, but that doesn't mean that you've gone backwards. And each time that you recognize what's happening and you listen to what you need and you find your way back, you're building something important. Trust in yourself. You're building that. And that's something that you get to carry with you, whatever comes next. So we don't have to be finished with the grief to keep living, and you don't have to lose yourself if grief finds you again. So just a quick few reminders before you go. If you want to stay connected, at another level, there's the Exit Generation community. You can also find us, if you want to reach out to John and I individually, you can find us on the exitgeneration.org, or you can find us on Facebook. And if you'd like to support Deservingly You can do that through Ko-Fi. The link is right there on the screen. And if you don't forget, the discussions in the Exit Generation Facebook group. That's where we get to keep that conversation going. And it's forward forward focused conversations instead of being stuck in something. So we hope that if you've been with us throughout this whole phase 2, we hope that you stay with us into phase 3. And I have a feeling that you're gonna see pretty quickly how much we've done in phase 2, how that connects to where we're gonna go next. So definitely stay curious and keep finding your way back. So we've officially reached that end. And so thank you for walking through this with us and for showing up and being willing to look at things that aren't always easy to look at. You know, letting us be part of these conversations with you. You know, wherever you're at in all of this, remember there's no timetable. You know, there's no finish line that you're supposed to have reached by now. Just keep paying attention to what you need and keep taking that next step that is yours to take. And if another wave comes, you know a little bit more now. You have more language and more awareness, more choices, and hopefully a little more trust in your ability to find your way back. So take care of yourselves this week, and we will see you next week. So good night, everybody.